Awesome, awesome. How about another round of applause for Casey and the amazing work that is being done at Camp Cedar Ridge? Yes. Yes. I've had the pleasure of working with Casey. She's one of my faves, so thank you for all you are doing. All right, so our next speaker, this is a fun one. I have a little bit of history with this one. We go back, we kind of have that East Coast connection. So I am thrilled to introduce to you Reverend Karen Russo. Reverend Karen, yes, Reverend Karen, all right. So Reverend Karen is an award-winning author of The Money Keys. She is the creator of the virtual courses Money Momentum Mastery and the 21-Day Spiritual Money Jumpstart. So with her unusual blend of experiences, an MBA from Columbia University, she's a top-selling salesperson, an accomplished corporate trainer with 30-plus years in recovery, and she is an ordained Centers for Spiritual Living minister since 2007. Karen is going to share with us a lifetime of wisdom, both in the spiritual world and business growth. So this morning, her talk is For Something and Against Nothing. So let's welcome Reverend Karen Russo.
How are you doing, Ellen did? Yes. Russo. For something and against nothing. For something and against nothing? Look, it's a powerful spiritual paradox. And it's one of the most tender and famous of Dr. Ernest Holmes' legacy teachings, for something and against nothing. So here, in the newness of now, let's see what we can discover about for something and against nothing so that we can emerge from this retreat, as Ellen suggested, on fire. Do you want that? Yes. Thank you. Yes, so do I. Retreat. For me, retreat usually begins with the scent of sage and ends with a foot scrub. Yeah. And retreat also has the definition of being the act of withdrawing, especially from that which is difficult, dangerous, or disagreeable. Withdrawing. So if we are to retreat from the places where we have againstness or fighting or conflict, can we still hold to our values, our identity, our passions? That's really the question in For Something and Against Nothing. I like to think about the beautiful people who were, in many ways, a lot like us. August 15th, 1959. And they were finishing up their time at Asilomar, moving across the meadow to the chapel to hear Dr. Ernest Holmes deliver a final talk. And what I wonder about is, did they realize while it was happening that this was going to be something that 60 years later we'd be quoting and dissecting? I really feel for that exciting question, because many of you know that what was delivered on that day we call Sermon by the Sea. And this is Dr. Holmes' charge to us in bringing religious science forward. So he begins. Our religion is not something to be lived merely here at Asilomar. We are part of the evolution of human destiny. We are part of the unfoldment of divine intelligence in human affairs. It opens us up. And then not far afterwards comes the famous passage. It would be wonderful indeed if a group of persons should arrive on earth who were for something and against nothing. That would be the summum bonum, that's Latin for the highest ideal, of human organization, wouldn't it? And then he says, it is in the life of the individual. Find me one person who is for something and against nothing, who is redeemed enough not to condemn others out of the burden of his or her or their soul, and I will find another Savior and an exalted human being. Find one person for something and against nothing, redeemed enough not to condemn others out of the burden of her soul. So he's delivering this talk 1959 and makes his transition in 1960. I was born the year after, and 30 years after that, I arrived at my first religious science center. And at that point in my life, I was living in Southern California. I had some professional stuff going on. I was fairly newly sober, and I was starting committed and working my recovery program. But I'd have to say that condemning others out of the burden of my soul was sort of my brand essence. So I was for things. I was for things like being right and solving problems, of which I had many. And I was against things like being wrong and the people who upset and hurt me and caused me problems, of which there were many. And a pretty exacerbated therapist said to me, "You know what? I've heard of this place called Agape on Olympic Boulevard. You might like it." And you know what? She was right. So here I am, coming to Agape for the first time, and I walk in. It was beautifully multicultural with amazing music. Everyone was very cheerful. I kind of suspected, why are they so cheerful? Yeah, very cheerful. And I made my way in, and I sat down in a tiny chair next to this kind of hippie guy who had a fanny pack. And the reason that that's important is over the next 2.5 hours, every time he was filled with a surge of the Spirit, which was frequently, he would gesticulate and the fanny pack would jostle me and I would kind of throw up in my mouth. So, 2.5 hours, and all I heard was every single speaker, Dr. Michael Beckwith, every practitioner, the person who did the announcements, all they said over and over again was, there's a part of you that's never been hurt, harmed, or endangered. There's a part of you that's never been hurt, harmed, or endangered. I thought, these people are in denial. But I stayed through the whole 2.5 hours, and at the end, the hippie guy hugged me one final time. And then you know the end of the story. I came back on Wednesday and the following Sunday, and then 5 times a week for the next 30 years, I've been at Agape or Namaste or now New Vision Center in North Phoenix. I've been at a religious science center. So what I didn't have the languaging to articulate at that time, that sweet woman, that young woman had been hurt. So as a child, I was hurt badly and constantly and told it wasn't that bad. And then I'd hurt others badly and constantly and told them it wasn't that bad. And out of that, I had a burden on my soul. The shame, the anger, just all of the things that today we would have the language for. It's trauma, it's abuse. You know, I was coming with that. And my core question of life, which I didn't, again, realize at the time, was, am I safe? And many of the people who come to our centers for the first time, they are under some kind of burden, right? They have a question on their soul. Am I loved? Do I matter? Do I belong? One of the things I invite us to is really discover for ourselves what's the core question of our lives, and then also be able to help others see how our spiritual principles can help to heal that. And at about this time, so about 30 years ago, I also discovered a women's self-defense program called Impact Personal Safety. And some of you know about this. It's this wonderful thing where it's led by women, but there's a guy who is a co-instructor, and he wears this giant padded suit so the women can, hit full force against the padded suit. And so I'm new in recovery, I'm going to Science of Mind, and I also discovered this program. And, as a first-time student, I had leg warmers and elbow pads because I thought that would keep me defended, right? And I was a nervous wreck, but the first time I went, no, I felt like Nafisa Monroe. I am Superwoman, I loved it. It was so therapeutic. And at the time, I was, for my voice and for my fighting spirit and against the assailant. But it was very healthy and helpful. And so, if some is good, more is better. I took all the classes that they had, and I trained as an instructor. And for about the next 10 years, I spent a great deal of my time in this position. There are 16 women with their toes to the mat, and there's a mat in front of us, and there's a woman lying on the mat. And there's this big assailant guy in a giant suit who's going to get on top of her. But we, were for that woman. So all we're saying to her is, he's going to make a mistake. When you go 100%. Your life is worth fighting for. You can do it. And over and over and over again, to this day, it's just such a powerful thing. I was for empowerment. And I started to think less and less about, what's the assailant doing and what's happening. For empowerment. It was such a healthy and good experience. And so, after about 10 years of doing that, I met the big fella, moved to Arizona, so I retired from doing that self-defense training. And so the next 20 years, I'm doing the deal just like we all do. I am, taking my practitioner training. Linda Watson was my practitioner trainer, my practitioner instructor. She's 2 for 2 this morning. And, I went through ministerial school, and I did my Science of Mind treatments and my forgiveness worksheets, and being of service, and just all the things that we do, and really developing the 2 things that our teaching allows for. Recommends, reveals. The 2 things. Number 1 is a relationship with a power greater than myself that is a personal relationship with the God of my understanding that is also an infinite presence. So no longer the mad dad in the sky, but this loving infinite presence that is forever with me, that deepening into our principle of love. And then I also, of course, was studying and practicing that consciousness is creative and starting to feel that the things in life were not happening to me, that I am cause in my life. So 20 years of all this active, you guys know what this is. And I'd always thought about that self-defense program. So here it is. It's 20 years since I threw my last front elbow. And it's not like I'm worried about my safety in my life today. I live on the mean streets of Old Town Scottsdale. And if I was ever grabbed from behind, no, I could count on Reverend Groin Slap. No. And so it is. Yeah. So I just feel like I'm fine. Yeah. So in real life, I'm not worried about my safety, but I'm wondering, could I do that intense physical training? And so this spring, just a couple months ago, I headed back to Sherman Oaks, and I got out on the mat, and here I am, with the body that I have now, and the fears and concerns that I have now. And the first scenario, there's the guy, creepy, and he's coming in, and I was like, no, I could do it. It was so exciting. Yeah, we love it. Now, of course, at this point of life, I have an extra superpower, which is potty mouth. Yeah. Potty mouth. So I sounded a little bit like that character from Ted Lasso, Roy Kent. I was like, rah, rah, rah. I was able to do all the moves, which was great. And on the second day, we're on the mat, and I'm lying on the mat. And I know what's coming. Giant guy's gonna get on top of it. And here's the thing, it feels real. That's why the training is so good. It's like you're really lying on the mat, and they're getting really on. And I started to have this moment where I thought, what if this really happened? What if I was assaulted, attacked? And I could feel this surge of like fear and sadness and concern, like the natural human experience of that. And I also had this sensation. It was like I was rising above what was happening. And there was a part of me, don't get me wrong, but there was a part of me that it was almost humor, that I was like, really, sweet spirit, we're going down like this. Like, is this really happening? Okay. Because I have a relationship with life that says no circumstance is not for me. You know, everything is for me. So in the moment, of course, I would never wish a horrific thing to happen to myself or anyone. And yet, I just have a part of me that felt calm. You see, there was a part of me. There was a part of me. There is a part of me that's never been hurt, harmed, or endangered. So a full circle moment from what I had originally heard at the Religious Science Center, a part of me that's never been hurt, harmed, or endangered. And in that moment, I was the one person. I am the one person. When it comes to safety, I am for divine safety. And there's no thing to be against, because a spiritual quality has no opposite. What that means is I can be profoundly for divine safety and be an advocate for physical safety for all people. One of the things that's great about that self-defense program is that, 30 years later, it's inclusive of all genders and much more inclusive of races and class and all people. It's available for everyone. I can be for that without having to be against anything. Our spiritual qualities, because they are infinite, they offer us that totality. That is what I invite all of us to do, is to bring the toughest, most tender spiritual questions of our lives, the am I safe type questions, and bring them to the power of our principles, because there is transformation and healing available. So that one person, here's what Dr. Holmes says about that one person. He says, now what does all this mean? I am talking about you and myself. When I say find a person, I don't mean go over to Rome or London or back to your own church. The search is not external. All of these people I have been talking about have no existence as such until they are finally centered in our soul. Then the guest for whom we are looking will be the self redeemed from the lesser self. This is a very interesting thing, he says, for nature is foolproof, and when the fruit is ripe, it will fall. When the kingdom of God is perceived, it will be experienced simultaneously, instantaneously, and in its entirety. And that last little bit is a whole teaching in itself, isn't it? Yeah, when the kingdom of God is perceived, it will be experienced simultaneously, instantaneously, and in its entirety. That is the power of a spiritual redemption. When it happens, simultaneous. I could feel in that moment, that realization healed that sweet little girl who'd been hurt and was a herder. It heals the woman I am to be in whatever circumstance I will ever be in. And in that moment, I felt the healing for myself. Instantaneously, means that the combination of 30 years of incremental work on forgiveness and changing consciousness is also held in this precious moment. And there's no waiting problem with time. It didn't come too late. It was in the now, in the newness of now, the whole bit of it. And then in its entirety means that it's a blessing for all. Because I am connected and part of the whole, I have a realization, it's a blessing for all. So that is the promise of our teaching. The final thing that I want to pull from what Dr. Holmes says is he reminds us, you are religious science. Our ministers, our teachers, our practitioners, our laity, you find me 1,000 people in the world who know what religious science is and use it and live it as it is, and I'll myself live to see a new world, a new heaven, and a new earth. Yeah. So our individual redemption is redemption for the whole. Our beloved Reverend Sonny Cantrell Smith on her Tune In Tuesday recently asked something like, what fears are you releasing about the CSL? And what I said is, I am releasing the fear that we'll lose our legacy. And the reason for that is this. Our legacy is principle. Principle is timeless. And because it is timeless and eternal and infinitely powerful, it is relevant to the people of all time and space. Now, I get it. There is so much that we have to take a look at, a strong, clear, fair look at in terms of being more inclusive and some of the cringeworthy view of some of the stories and the examples and things. I get it. But our legacy is principle. And that will stand the test of time. So, you and I, we are religious science. The principles are powerful. And as he would say, our religion is not something to be lived merely here at Asilomar. We are part of the evolution of human destiny. You find me one person who is for something and against nothing. That one person, it's you, it's me, it's all of us. Peace and blessings. Yeah.